An old man, in a simple red shirt, bearing the bold words, "I'll give free treatment," storms into a private hospital, kicking out the arrogant manager in front of stunned staff and patients. The crowd whispers in disbelief, "Isn't that Warren Buffett?" But no one could imagine the shocking truth he was about to reveal. What happens next shakes the entire healthcare system to its core. The modestly dressed man with silver-gray hair stood at the hospital entrance, his hand raised, pointing toward the visibly agitated hospital manager. "You're done here. Leave, now." Warren Buffett's voice echoed through the bustling lobby, firm yet calm. The air in the room felt electric. Disbelief plastered on the faces of onlookers, patients, nurses, even doctors pausing mid-step to watch the surreal scene unfold. The manager, a man in a pristine suit with an air of entitlement, looked flabbergasted. His face flushed red as he sputtered, "Excuse me? Do you even know who you're talking to? You can't just walk in here, wearing that ridiculous shirt, and tell me to leave." All eyes darted to the bright red shirt Warren wore, its bold white letters screaming, "I'll give free treatment." It seemed absurdly out of place in the sterile white halls of the private hospital, where everything, from the gleaming floors to the overpriced coffee in the lobby, exuded wealth and exclusivity. To everyone watching, Warren looked like just another elderly man, perhaps a bit eccentric, who had wandered into the wrong building. But his commanding tone and unshakable confidence suggested otherwise. Warren didn't flinch. His eyes, sharp and piercing despite his age, locked on the manager's face. "I said leave. You have no place here." His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority that silenced even the faint whispers in the room. The manager straightened his tie, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Listen, old man," he sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. "This is a private hospital. We don't entertain random people coming in off the streets, let alone someone wearing that." He gestured disdainfully toward Warren's shirt, his eyes rolling. "So, unless you want security to escort you out, I suggest you step aside." But Warren didn't move. Instead, he took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "I've been here all morning," he said quietly, his words deliberate. "Watching you, watching your staff, watching the way you treat the people who walk through these doors." The manager scoffed, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Warren continued, his voice growing sharper, "you've forgotten what this place is supposed to stand for. Compassion, care, healing. All I've seen today is arrogance, greed, and indifference. You're more interested in profit margins than in saving lives." The crowd around them stirred, whispers growing louder as they pieced together what was happening. A nurse near the reception desk gasped softly, recognizing Warren's face, but too stunned to speak. Others exchanged puzzled looks, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. The manager, now visibly annoyed, barked, "Who do you think you are to lecture me about this hospital? Do you have any idea how much money it takes to keep a place like this running? Who do you think pays for all this?" He gestured dramatically to the pristine walls, the advanced equipment, the state-of-the-art facilities. For the first time, a faint smile tugged at the corners of Warren's lips. "Oh," he said softly, his tone almost amused. "I think you'd be surprised." The manager opened his mouth to retort, but Warren raised a hand, silencing him. He turned to the crowd, his voice carrying across the room. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, the cryptic words leaving everyone in stunned silence. The lobby fell into an uneasy silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The hospital manager's face twisted with frustration, his pride refusing to bow to what he perceived as a random old man's audacity. He gestured sharply at a nearby security guard, barking, "Get this man out of here, now!" The security guard hesitated, his eyes darting between the irate manager and the calm, unyielding figure of Warren Buffett. Something about Warren's presence made the guard pause, as if he instinctively sensed there was more to this confrontation than met the eye. Warren remained rooted, completely unshaken. "Go ahead," he said coolly, his gaze fixed on the manager. "Call your security. Bring the entire staff if you want. But before you do, ask yourself, can you afford what happens next?" The guard froze, unsure what to do. The murmur of the crowd around them grew louder. A patient in a wheelchair whispered to their caretaker, "That's Warren Buffett, isn't it? What's he doing here?" Another nurse whispered back, "No way. It can't be. Why would he come here, dressed like that?" The manager, catching these whispers, turned pale for a moment before forcing a sneer back onto his face. "Oh, don't try to intimidate me with theatrics, old man. If you're who they think you are, then why are you wearing that?" He jabbed a finger at Warren's red shirt, the slogan, "I'll give free treatment," now glaring under the bright hospital lights. "Do you think you can waltz in here looking like a joke and make demands?" Warren's calm demeanor didn't falter. He reached into the pocket of his modest trousers and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Without a word, he handed it to the manager. The man snatched it with a huff, unfolding it quickly. His smug expression melted away in an instant. The paper bore a letterhead that the crowd couldn't see, but the color drained from the manager's face as his eyes darted over the words. His lips moved silently as he read. The logo at the top of the paper was unmistakable: Buffett Healthcare Holdings. "You," the manager stammered, his voice cracking. This can't be real." Warren tilted his head, his piercing gaze unwavering. "Oh, it's very real. That's a formal notice of termination, effective immediately." The crowd gasped. The whispers turned into a full-blown buzz as phones came out to record the unfolding drama. The manager's hands shook as he crumpled the paper, his arrogance collapsing into panic. This is my hospital. I've been running this place for years. You can't just walk in and—" Warren cut him off with a quiet but firm tone. "It's my hospital," he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the entire room. "I own this hospital. In fact, I own every hospital in this country, and I don't have time for people like you turning them into dens of greed." The revelation hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Gasps and murmurs erupted as people scrambled to process the enormity of what they'd just heard. The manager staggered back a step, his face a mask of disbelief. You own this place? You own everything?" Warren didn't bother repeating himself. He turned to the security guard, who was still frozen in place, unsure what to do. "Escort him out," Warren said simply, "and make sure he doesn't step foot in any hospital again. Not as a manager, not as a visitor." The guard blinked, then nodded quickly, stepping toward the now deflated manager. The man stumbled over his words, trying to protest, but the guard's firm grip on his arm made it clear that there was no room for negotiation. As the manager was led away, Warren turned back to the crowd. His red shirt, once mocked, now stood as a beacon of everything the hospital had forgotten. The slogan, "I'll give free treatment," suddenly felt less absurd and more like a promise, one that carried the weight of someone who could actually make it happen. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as the now defeated manager was escorted out, his protests fading into the distance. Warren stood in the center of the lobby, his unassuming red shirt and calm demeanor now commanding the attention of every single person in the room. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. There was something magnetic about his presence, something that made even the most skeptical onlooker lean in a little closer. A nurse stepped forward hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Buffett, is it really you? Why are you here? And why this hospital?" Warren turned toward her, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. "Yes, it's me. And I'm here because I've been hearing far too many stories about what goes on in hospitals like this one. Stories about patients turned away because they can't afford care. Stories about staff being overworked and underappreciated. Stories about a system that's forgotten the meaning of healing." The nurse's face softened, her shoulders relaxing as if she finally understood. Around her, other staff members exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding subtly in agreement. They all knew the truth of what Warren was saying, but none had dared to voice it, until now. But another voice chimed in, this time from a young doctor near the reception desk. "Why come here like this? Why the shirt? Why not announce yourself properly?" Warren's lips curled into a faint smile. He glanced down at the bold letters on his red shirt, the slogan that had caused such a stir. "Because sometimes you need to see how people treat you when they don't know who you are," he said simply. "I wanted to see this place for what it really is, without the polished tours or rehearsed speeches. And what I saw..." His voice trailed off, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of disappointment and resolve. "What I saw is a place that's lost its way." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint beeping of monitors and the distant hum of hospital machinery. Warren's gaze softened as he turned to the patients sitting in the waiting area, their faces a mix of confusion, hope, and desperation. He took a step toward an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her frail hands clutching a clipboard with payment documents she clearly couldn't afford. "What's your name?" Warren asked gently. The woman hesitated, looking up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Margaret, she stammered. I just came in for a checkup, but they said I can't see a doctor until I pay the fee up front." Warren knelt beside her, his voice soft but firm. "Margaret, you'll get your treatment today, and you won't pay a cent for it." The woman's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. Around her, the other patients began to murmur, their hope growing as they watched the scene unfold. A young mother holding her sick child stepped forward cautiously, her voice shaky. "Does that mean we can get help too, even if we can't pay?" Warren stood, his presence towering, yet gentle. "Every single one of you will get the care you need," he said, his voice carrying across the room like a promise, carved in stone. "And not just here, but in every hospital in this country. That's what this shirt means. It's not a slogan. It's a commitment." The room erupted into applause, the tension dissolving into a wave of gratitude and relief. Staff members began wiping their eyes, some stepping forward to shake Warren's hand, others standing in stunned silence as they processed the magnitude of what was happening. But Warren wasn't finished. He turned back to the staff, his expression growing serious. "From this day forward, this hospital will operate differently. Patients will come first, not profit. If anyone has a problem with that, they're free to leave. But if you stay, you'll be part of something bigger than yourself. You'll be part of a system that truly heals." The young nurse who had spoken earlier stepped forward again, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I'm staying," she said firmly. This is what I became a nurse for." Others followed her lead, nodding and voicing their agreement. The energy in the room shifted, the weight of the moment sinking in for everyone present. Warren took a deep breath, his red shirt now a symbol, not of controversy, but of hope. The mood in the hospital had completely shifted. What began as a scene of tension and disbelief had turned into a collective sense of hope, purpose, and change. Warren stood at the center of it all, his presence magnetic, his red shirt now an emblem of something far more profound than its simple words. But just as the applause and murmurs began to settle, a man in a lab coat, an older doctor with a stern face, stepped forward, his arms crossed tightly. His expression was skeptical, almost defiant. "This is all very noble, Mr. Buffett," he began, his voice calm, but edged with doubt. "But do you realize what you're proposing? Running a hospital without focusing on profit? Do you know how much it costs to keep a facility like this operational? Equipment, staff salaries, medical supplies. It doesn't pay for itself." The crowd turned their attention to the doctor, some nodding slightly, others frowning at his words. Warren didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer to the doctor, his voice steady and calm. "I know exactly what it costs," he said. "I've been paying for it longer than you've been working here." The doctor blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Warren continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. "I've spent decades building a healthcare system that could actually help people, not exploit them. And do you know what I've learned? It's not the cost of treatment that makes healthcare expensive. It's the greed, the unnecessary markups, the hidden fees, the layers of bureaucracy designed to squeeze every last cent out of patients who are already suffering." The doctor's expression faltered, but he wasn't ready to back down. "That sounds idealistic," he countered, "but this is the real world. What you're suggesting could lead to shortages, overworked staff. Or it could lead to a system that works," Warren interrupted, his voice sharp, but not unkind. "You're right. Change is hard. It's messy. It makes people uncomfortable. But it's also necessary. And I'm not here to ask for your permission. I'm here to fix what's broken." The room was silent again, the weight of Warren's words sinking in. The doctor shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his colleagues, many of whom were watching Warren with expressions of quiet admiration. Finally, the doctor sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "And if you're wrong?" he asked, his tone softer now. "What happens if this doesn't work?" Warren's face softened, a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. "Then I'll keep trying," he said simply, "because the alternative, doing nothing, isn't an option." The doctor hesitated for a moment longer before nodding slowly. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's see if you're right." Warren extended a hand, and after a brief pause, the doctor shook it. The crowd erupted into cheers, the energy in the room shifting once again. Staff members began talking among themselves, many already discussing how they could adapt to this new vision. Patients smiled, tears of relief streaming down their faces as they realized they were finally being seen, not as numbers, but as people. Warren turned back to the crowd, his voice carrying above the noise. "This isn't just about one hospital," he said. "This is about every hospital, every patient, every community. And it starts here, today. Together, we can build a system that actually works, for everyone." The applause was deafening. Staff members who had once been skeptical now stood shoulder to shoulder with their colleagues, united in a shared sense of purpose. Patients who had entered the hospital feeling hopeless now left with a renewed sense of dignity and hope. As the crowd began to disperse, Warren walked quietly toward the exit, his red shirt still drawing glances, but now with admiration instead of scorn. A young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve, pointing at Warren as he walked by. "Who is he, Mom?" the boy asked, his voice filled with awe. The mother smiled softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "He's the man who's going to change everything." Warren paused at the door, glancing back at the hospital one last time. The building, once a symbol of indifference and greed, now felt like the beginning of something far greater. He adjusted his red shirt, the bold slogan catching the sunlight, and stepped out into the world, ready to take the next step in his quiet revolution. As Warren stepped out into the warm afternoon sun, the echoes of cheers and applause still lingered in the air behind him. Outside the hospital, a small group of reporters had already gathered, their cameras snapping away as soon as he appeared. Word of his unexpected visit and the explosive events inside had started to spread like wildfire. One reporter, a young woman with sharp features and a microphone in hand, pushed her way forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Mr. Buffett, can you explain what happened inside? Why were you here? And what does this mean for the future of this hospital?" Warren paused, his calm gaze scanning the sea of cameras and faces before him. He knew the world was watching now, and he needed to choose his words carefully. After a brief moment, he took a step closer to the reporters, his red shirt still vibrant under the sunlight. "I came here today as a reminder," he began, his voice measured but firm. "A reminder that hospitals, places meant to heal and care for people, have lost their way. Too often, they've become businesses, putting profits above patients. And that's not something I'm willing to accept." The reporters scribbled furiously, their cameras rolling. Warren continued, "What happened inside wasn't just about one hospital or one manager. It's about a broken system that needs to be fixed. And I've made it my mission to ensure that happens. Every hospital in this country that I've invested in will no longer prioritize profit over people. From today forward, every patient who walks through those doors will be treated with dignity and care, regardless of their financial situation." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a flurry of questions. "Does this mean free health care in your hospitals? How will this be funded? Are you challenging the entire healthcare system?" Warren held up a hand, silencing the barrage of inquiries. "I'm not here to argue with the system. I'm here to prove that a better way is possible. And yes, every hospital I own will prioritize free or affordable treatment for those in need. It's not about challenging anyone. It's about doing what's right." The crowd erupted into murmurs again, some skeptical, others inspired. One elderly man in the crowd, clutching his cane, stepped forward and shouted, "You're a good man, Mr. Buffett. Don't let anyone stop you." Warren turned toward the man, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying a warmth that resonated with everyone listening. But just as the atmosphere began to settle, a new voice cut through the commotion. It was a man in an expensive suit, stepping out of a sleek black car that had pulled up moments earlier. His expression was smug, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Well, well, Warren, another grand gesture to save the world, I see. But let's be honest. How sustainable is this little crusade of yours?" The crowd turned toward the man, their expressions shifting to confusion and unease. Warren, however, didn't flinch. He recognized the man instantly, a rival businessman who had long been critical of Warren's philanthropic efforts, particularly in healthcare. "Hello, Martin," Warren said evenly, his voice steady. "I wondered how long it would take for someone like you to show up." Martin chuckled, stepping closer. "You can't just march into hospitals and start making promises, Warren." Healthcare is a business, whether you like it or not, and businesses need profits to survive. What you're doing? It's a nice dream, but dreams don't pay the bills. Warren's eyes narrowed, his calm demeanor giving way to a steely resolve. What I'm doing, he said, his voice cutting through the tension, is proving that healthcare doesn't have to be a business to succeed. It just needs people who care more about healing than hoarding wealth. The crowd cheered, but Martin smirked, clearly unfazed. We'll see how long that lasts, he said before turning back toward his car. Good luck, Warren. You'll need it. As Martin drove away, Warren turned back to the reporters and the crowd, his expression unshaken. There will always be people who doubt change, he said, but I'm not here for them. I'm here for the people who need it most. With that, he stepped away from the cameras, his mind already focused on the next steps. The journey ahead would be long, and the resistance fierce. But Warren knew one thing with absolute certainty. The seeds of change had been planted today, and no amount of doubt or opposition could stop them from growing. As the crowd dispersed and the reporters retreated to file their breaking stories, Warren slipped into a quiet corner of the hospital parking lot. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the building he had just transformed into the epicenter of change. For a moment, he allowed himself a deep breath, taking in the gravity of what had just unfolded. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from one of his closest advisors. The announcement is already trending. Public reaction is split. Supporters are calling it revolutionary, while critics are questioning the sustainability. You've stirred the pot, Warren. As always. He typed back quickly. Good. Let them question. Change doesn't come easy. Sliding the phone back into his pocket, he turned to see the young nurse from earlier, approaching him hesitantly. Her uniform was slightly wrinkled, her face showing the exhaustion of a long shift, but her eyes held a glimmer of hope. Mr. Buffett, she began softly, I just wanted to thank you. I've worked here for years, and I've seen so many patients walk away untreated because they couldn't pay. Today, you gave all of us a reason to believe again. Warren smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came not from pride, but from knowing he had done something that mattered. It's not about me, he replied. It's about all of us. You're the ones who keep places like this running. I'm just giving you the tools to do it the way it should have been done all along. She nodded, her gratitude evident. But how did you even think of coming here dressed like that? The shirt, the surprise. It was so unconventional. Warren chuckled lightly, glancing down at the now famous red shirt with the bold slogan, I'll give free treatment. Sometimes, he said, you need to remind people that appearances can be deceiving. That change doesn't come from suits or boardrooms. It comes from action, from standing up and doing what's right, no matter how ridiculous it might seem at first. The nurse smiled, her eyes glistening. Well, it worked, and I think you've changed this hospital forever. As she walked back inside, Warren turned toward the horizon, his mind already racing ahead. The message of what had happened today would ripple far beyond this single hospital. Patients would feel heard, staff would feel empowered, and his critics would have to contend with a system that no longer bent to their greed. But Warren also knew this was just the beginning. For every hospital that embraced his vision, there would be others resisting it. For every person who cheered his name, there would be another working behind the scenes to undermine him. And yet, none of that mattered. Not when there were lives to be saved and a system to be fixed. He took one last look at the hospital, its glowing sign now standing as a beacon of hope in the community. adjusting the cap on his head, a simple baseball cap he had tucked into his car earlier. He walked toward his vehicle, his steps steady, his resolve stronger than ever. The words from his shirt echoed in his mind. I'll give free treatment. A promise, a revolution, a commitment to a future where no one would ever have to choose between their health and their livelihood. As Warren drove off into the fading light, he knew the road ahead would be long, but he also knew one thing for sure. He was ready for the fight. The richest man on the planet wasn't about to let wealth define him. Instead, he'd let it change the world.